down there, and Trump is heading to Scotland for a working visit focused on golf properties, I should say, and everything like that. So definitely looks like he's heading there to look at some possible business deals. And the federal appeals court rules California ammunition background checks are unconstitutional. So Gavin Newsom has blasted the judges over that particular gun ruling and all along those lines. So definitely that is one of the things that folks are talking about. I'm going to bring in my special guest, Emilio Justo, and see what he's got going on with this very powerful book of his and all along those lines. And then we'll get into some more discussions about world affairs and everything like that. But first, definitely want to invite you because you've got this very powerful book that says that the American dream is alive and that there are a lot of things that we can do. And you also got a study in a form of medicine that I'm not that familiar with called biopharoplasty, because you're an expert in that field and you've done TEDx talks and all along those lines. So definitely I'm looking forward to hearing more about what you've got going on and this very powerful book of yours, The Power of Pause. Because sometimes it seems like during COVID, we're in the middle of rush, and even had some people slow down and even work from home. But still, there was that rush mentality of the West and everything like that. But you're saying, hey, slow down, take it easy, pause for a minute, and all along those lines. So tell us about your book and about your field of study as well.
Well, thank you so very much, Mark. It's really a pleasure and a privilege to be here with you. A lot of individuals ask me, what inspired me to write The Power of Pause, Mastering Delayed Gratification for Success. And really, it started with my own life. As a refugee from Cuba, I learned early that things don't come easy. I was raised by my parents to work hard, to wait patiently, and to trust that effort eventually pays off. And later, as an eye surgeon and a father, I saw how urgency was ruining our decision-making, and especially for young people. I mean, I have 3 teenagers and I see what goes on and I don't really like it. So I wrote this book to remind the world that pause is not passive. It's preparation for something greater. It's really, in my view, Mark, it's about creating an intentional space between impulse and action. Whether it's just waiting a split second before sending an angry email or delaying a purchase, that pause is where your self-control lives. And the people who master it, Mark, they win in the long run, guaranteed.
And I know that one of the things you talked about is that there were some impactful moments in your life and that they helped you with your insights. You mentioned that you were a Cuban refugee, and I'm thinking that might have been either during one of the more, like the time that Cuba was a resort destination before the communist takeover and all along those lines. So just tell me a little bit about your own upbringing and some of these impactful moments and insights.
Certainly, Mark. It's interesting when I think back to growing up. My parents would. I came over from Cuba at an early age, so I don't have great recollection of a lot of things since I was 3 years old. But my parents would always share with me stories of going to the so-called grocery line or even going to the pharmacy, and they literally had to wait hours in line just to get bread or just to get toilet paper. But they never complained. Why? Because they had perspective. And that's when I first learned early in my life that patience isn't about waiting per se. It's about what you do while you wait. In the United States, we're blessed with so much convenience, instant everything. We get it the same day, the same moment. But unfortunately, that convenience has robbed us of one of life's most powerful muscles, and that muscle is delayed gratification. So I wrote the book because I believe regaining that muscle of delayed gratification is the key to our mental health, our financial health, and our long-term success.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and all along those lines, Why do you think so many people are into that instant gratification? Because I do remember years ago there was a popular movie called Wall Street, and it seemed that it was definitely that greed mentality and all along those lines. And it seems like we have slipped back into that mindset. Some people would argue that even some of our political leaders are helping us go into that mindset. But I just wanted your take on why we have this mindset. I know even on this network we've talked a lot about AI, and AI seems to be playing into that as well.
Yes, Mark, I think the reason for that is that we have everything at our fingertips, and that instant gratification, undoubtedly, myself included, right? I'm not perfect. There's lots of things that I want instant gratification, but it gives us a dopamine rush, right? So if we use our willpower to just pause for a moment, and our willpower really comes from our prefrontal cortex, that instant gratification, that fight or flight, that needing it now, really comes from our amygdala in our brain. And so that dopamine rush is very powerful. It's very addictive. And I truly believe that we're in a society, and really not just in the United States, it's spread throughout the world, where we want everything now. We don't want Amazon 2-day shipping. We want Amazon same-day shipping, right? So it's understandable, and some things may be good to have that instant gratification. But as far as the bigger items in our life, Mark, I would argue wholeheartedly that it's really better to pause, to think about it, to meditate, and then circle back around later, a few days later, a week later, and see if that particular subject matter really has the same influence on you. It may have lost its momentum, and in many cases, it has. So just pausing and reflecting can be extremely powerful. It's not a passive act. I would argue that pausing is an active act.
It sounds like an active act and everything. Are there parts of the world that are better at pausing and better at relaxing? I mean, we oftentimes hear about people that are in parts of the world that don't have as much access to technology and all along those lines. So it seems whether that is the Aborigine people or others, that they would have greater access to the notion of pause. And we also hear a lot of families that are multi-generationals in the family and everything like that. So that might help with the slow down process as well. But I just wanted your take on that, because it does seem like certain societies are more keen to being able to step back and relax. I mean, you mentioned being from Cuba, and one of the things that I admire about the Spanish culture is that they oftentimes will take a siesta. And even Nick Valveda, our founder, and he's actually here on the call. Hopefully he'll be joining us. Talks about how a lot of times, even in Spain, they will sit down and have that relaxing time and everything like that. So I'm just wondering, because he's moved to Spain, become a expatriate, and all along those lines. I wanted to your take on whether certain countries are more relaxed and able to do more of this pausing that you are advocating for.
That's a great question, Mark. That's the first time I've been asked that. And as I reflect, I mean, my ultimate heritage, even though I was born in Cuba, my father was from Spain, so I know Spain quite well, and I've been there a number of times. And you are correct. In Spain, they actually close down the shops in the afternoon. A lot of the retail stores, and their big meal is a late lunchtime meal with the family, and then they take a siesta or just relax. And that's a cultural thing. However, Mark, I'm not so sure that necessarily stops this instant gratification feel, from the standpoint that we have technology. We have smartphones all over the world practically, even in communist Cuba. I mean, it's incredible how so many of the Cubans have cell phone technology. So, but in general, I think that if you were in a country where you're not influenced so much by technology, I don't know this for a fact, but I visited Scandinavian countries, such as Norway, Sweden, Finland. And even though they have the technology, I must say, I think that their culture has given them a sense of a little bit more pausing, a little bit more reflection. To me, at least, when I visited, they didn't seem in a rush, necessarily wanting that instant gratification. And the same would be true, Mark. I mean, think for a second. Most of us have
That
had
makes a lot of
the ble-
Go ahead.
most of us have had the blessing of, let's say, going on vacation and going to some island. And if you left your cell phone behind, it would be amazing how much more you could enjoy your trip by relaxation, meditation, spending time with family and friends, and not having the hubbub that goes on around us all the time in a country like the United States and many other countries. It's a cultural thing. It's a technology thing. It all blends together.
No, that makes a lot of sense and everything. Along those same lines, what would it like to have this honor that many people don't get to have and everything? But you are a TEDx talker, and I think that last year you had the #1 most viewed TEDx talk of 2024. So, what was that like to have that honor, and what was it that drove people to come to that particular TEDx talk, and what was the TEDx talk about that was going to draw so many eyeballs to come and see that particular TEDx talk?
Yeah, thank you for asking about that, Mark. I'm very proud and I'm very, very humbled by the fact that I've done two TEDx talks in my life, one in 2023 on delayed gratification, which actually ended up being the #3 global TEDx video that year. And then last year in 2024, I delivered a TEDx talk at Western University in Ontario, Canada, it's called Unleashing the Drive Within, the Obsession Advantage to Unprecedented Success. And that talk basically flipped the script, flipped the paradigm of turning obsession not from a negative connotation of one of like an obsessive compulsive disorder, but flipping it to a positive, powerful connotation where we use obsession to lead us to all the successes in our life in every sense of the word. And I'm a true believer in that. I think to really achieve whatever we want, whether it's family oriented, personal, career, that we need to be obsessed with our goal in mind, but not in a negative way. We need just to have that positive power of obsession. So I was very humbled that YouTube video has garnered, not sure currently, but I think somewhere around 3.5 million views. And it's been an incredible blessing, incredible journey.
It sounds like it and everything. Now, I know that you went from being a valedictorian in your school to definitely having these lessons that were taught as well. And apparently a lot of that was built on your faith journey as well as grit and purpose. So I was just wondering if you could talk to our audience about the importance of grit and purpose as well as that importance of faith in your own journey and just in terms of being a success.
Yes, Mark, I'm an avid, ardent believer in grit, perseverance, resilience, being able to bounce back, from trials and tribulations and failures. I'm one who has had many failures in my life, believe me, and some have been hugely tremendous failures. But really, when I reflect back, it's these failures that have made me who I am, because I think it's important that we accept those failures, that we almost search for the failures, because every failure that we have is one step closer to getting to our level of success that we're trying to achieve. And so, as a Cuban refugee, my parents were the role models. I mean, they came to this country, the three of us, with nothing, literally nothing, just the clothes on our back. And my parents had to learn a new language. My father had to work 2 full-time jobs. My mother had to go away to college to restudy, even though she had her doctorate in education from the University of Havana. So it just showed me this incredible determination that my parents had, and they were firm believers in the American dream. And as a result, I have become a believer in the American dream, and I've lived the American dream, Mark. I mean, I've had so many blessings in my life. Yes, have I had failures? Absolutely. But I've been able to power through and learn from my failures. And even at my tender, young age that I am now, I still make stupid mistakes, Mark. I mean, I'm a flawed human being, as all of us are. But to my core, I'm a believer in resilience, perseverance, hard work, and dedication, and I think that can translate to ultimate success for each and every one of us.
It makes sense. I know before I bring in Nick and some of the other people from the network and everything like that, and they may have questions for you as well. I know one of the reasons that Pod TV was created was this notion that we're not doing enough in education. We're not doing enough in terms of teaching fiscal literacy, in terms of teaching geography, in terms of teaching a number of things along those lines. But you said that education and self improvement are the essential foundations of success. So I was just wondering your take on the education system as it is now, because like I said, I know that that's part of the reason that Nick Palveda, one of the founders of the network, along with Kim Calhoun, founded this network, is because they wanted to bring things to the attention that are not oftentimes brought to the attention in our public school systems or even just in society in general.
Wow, that's an insightful question, Mark. Again, one that I've never been asked before, but I think it's a powerful question. And, I'm a little bit old school, I will readily admit. So I definitely 100% believe in education. Now, that education can vary from person to person. That doesn't necessarily mean that everyone is destined for college. But, there are many different trade schools. And there's so many jobs that we have to fill in this country. So it's not necessarily college, but I do believe in education. I have this debate with our two older sons because, they say, education is not necessary unless you're going into a high level profession like medicine or law. But I disagree. The education teaches us so much, not just about the world, but also about ourselves, about learning to discipline ourselves, learning to have social interaction. The one thing I would say, Mark, that I think education could improve upon is that, at least in my experience, maybe your audience may have different experiences, but in my experience, education doesn't prepare us for life. It doesn't always give us those practical tools. And what are examples of that? I mean, something as simple as, hey, learn how to pay your bills, learn how to balance your checkbook, learn basic finance, accounting, things that I never learned from a coursework. I just learned by the school of hard knocks, making mistakes throughout my life. Going into medicine, for example, in medical school, no medical school that I'm aware of, and I have students that rotate through my office all the time, they don't teach the upcoming new doctors how to run a medical practice. Not at all. You got to figure that out yourself. So I think education needs a little bit more of a practical element to get us ready for any stage of our life. It doesn't matter if you're going to be an electrician, a welder, a lawyer, a nurse, a school teacher, but we have to learn how to manage our life to try to minimize some of those obstacles and mistakes that are bound to be made.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm going to bring in Dr. Sharif, who comes in from Bangladesh, as well as Rick Rosner, who comes in from California, and Sasha Starr from Canada, and a number of, I think, Nick's going to join us as well, and John in Canada as well. But definitely, you brought up this notion of what's going on and all along those lines. And like I said, Nick's got spending the time in Spain right now. But one thing you're talking about is in your books is setting clearly defined long-term goals. And Nick, you got that Mickey Mouse thing going, so you got to check your mic.
All right, so I've been thinking about what you're saying in terms of COVID, not least because right now I have COVID. And COVID, which has infected at least half of all Americans, preferentially targets the frontal lobe of your brain, which is where your self-control and patience lives. So we're at a dangerous point culturally because a big chunk of the population may have a little bit of brain damage that makes it harder for us to have self-control and patience. And two, as you have written about, I'm sure, social media is immediate gratification and erodes patience.
Absolutely, Rick. I couldn't agree with you more. And yes, I did write about the social media influence. Your comment about COVID and the frontal lobe, I think, is a really astute comment, because you are correct. I think that as that is affected, particularly, let's say maybe in some of these cases of so-called long COVID, that potentially could be affected. I'm not aware of any studies particularly on this. There may be, but I think that would be fascinating to find out if somehow COVID can affect one's ability to control that desire for immediate gratification.
Well, you look at pro athletes who, in their younger years, had to develop a lot of diligence and patience. And if they're in a contact sport where their head gets knocked around, that beats up their frontal lobes. And in their later years, you see, a lot of like NFL players show a lack of impulse control.
Absolutely. That I think has been shown scientifically. So not just NFL players, boxers, anyone with contact sports like you're saying, and being able to just try and pause and control that impulse, try to rewire your brain. And ways to do that is just to practice just by simple things, just taking a couple minutes to pause, maybe take little, what I call non-stimulus breaks, meaning, put down your phone, step away from the TV, just take 10, 15 minutes a day where you're just going to be quiet, think to yourself, reflect, almost like a meditation. You don't have to be a meditation activist per se, but just reflect. I mean, I do that not on purpose. It just makes me feel good. I'll just sit in the bedroom when no one's there, maybe dim the lights, think to myself, think about my life, think about the choices that I'm making just for a few minutes, 10 or 15 minutes. And it's actually refreshing. And over time, the more you do that, I do believe that rewires your brain.
It makes a lot of sense, everything. Just really quickly, and I do see that Nick, who's now living in Spain, is with us and everything. But what is the marshmallow experiment? Because it looks like that was something that you talk about in one of your books as well. So what is the marshmallow experiment?
Yeah, the Stanford marshmallow test was really quite famous from the early 70s. And basically, they took young children ages 4 through 6, and they put them in a room and gave them the instructions that they could either have one marshmallow now, or if they waited about 15 minutes, they would be given a second marshmallow at that time. And then basically they stepped out of the room. They observed these kids, and some who really, really struggled and came up with ways to delay that immediate gratification. Others just ate the marshmallow right away. But then the interesting thing, Mark, was that they did longitudinal studies years later. And those children who delayed that gratification and waited for that second marshmallow did so much better in life, both emotionally, mentally, spiritually, physically, academically. They had higher SAT scores. So it's certainly strong evidence showing that delaying gratification can really help in terms of development.
So their EQ is a lot higher, and they don't measure the EQ. By the way, Dr. Justin, I found what you said very interesting, because I'm an attorney, and they don't teach you how to open up your own law practice if you go to law school. But I've had my own law practice for 40 years now, and have my own business for 25 years. But I can tell you, through all the education I got, formal, not one course on how to manage your own practice, how to open your own practice. So when I graduated from law school, I actually bought a book, How to Start Your Own Law Practice Without Skipping a Meal. So immediately when I graduated and passed the bar, I immediately started my own law practice, which was unheard of in the 1980s. You always said, well, you got to go work for another lawyer and blah, blah, blah. And so no, not going to do that. However, the formal education is definitely lacking, because probably about half the people that graduate from law school will eventually own their own practice. And there's no teaching whatsoever. In terms of relaxing, even though the background is Washington, D.C., I'm beaming in from Barcelona, Spain, where I bought a place here. And the average life expectancy in Spain is 84. In the United States, it's 77. But they do have I call it my Spanish lifestyle. We just got done with our siesta. And so, because it's later here, we're ahead of time. And they operate totally different. I call it my Spanish lifestyle. I was in California yesterday dealing with the Californian American lifestyle, which is totally different. But there's a nonstop between here and LA. So I was in Rick's neck of the woods. There it's always you get in a car, drive somewhere, always get in a car. Here you walk. You walk, you take public transportation, forget the car. It's like New York, but not at the fast pace. So people have to get adjusted to a better way, or a different way of life, however you wanted to say it. Anyway, I got my residency here. So resident of Spain, citizen of the U.S. And Rick
he's playing in Spain and everything. Rick's got a question.
Yeah.
So, I mean, with our last two presidents, you see a difference in style that involves patience. Like Biden was criticized for being too quiet, too slow, too methodical. And then now Trump is all knee-jerk and immediate reaction. And then one more thing is we have an international baby shortage where the U.S. and a bunch of other countries, the U.S. hit an all-time low last year with an average number of kids birthed by women at 1.599, which is only 76% of the replacement rate. And when you think about it, coupling up and raising a family is an exercise in patience. You have to, if you're a guy, you have to work hard to make yourself presentable to women. You have to date a bunch of women till you find somebody where you can get along with each other. And then you have to devote a huge amount of time and resources to child rearing. And people have less and less patience for that.
What's your take
Very
on
good point.
Dr. Justo and everything like that? And by the way, we've also got Dr. Sharif, and one of the things that he is very much about is societies actually blending and working together. Because like I said, he is in Bangladesh, but he's done work with schools in California, in New York, I believe, as well as other parts of the world as well. So he's got the World Economic Talent Forum that talks a lot about unity and trying to find ways to address a lot of the issues that are going on in the world, whether that's climate change or whether that's a number of other things. But he's been observing your observations and your book as well, but he may have some questions for you also. But Dr. Sharif is doing work in terms of the youth and connecting people from different societies.
Thank you. This is very interesting discussions. I just listen all of your discussions and dialogue. It's very interesting, and especially how you share your experience about the American dream. Many of my students, they have the same thing, like how they can like get involved with this American dream, right? Even from Bangladesh, from India, from South Asia, from Asia Pacific. Many people love to do that. Even I teach Chinese students. Chinese students also big fan of American dream. So my question is about your leaderships. Like when you come from different cultures, and you and your family, how I listened that your father has to do 2 jobs, your mother has to finish another degree in USA, even she has PhD from your country. So how you adjust with this different culture, or how American society and culture actually welcome you to engage with their mainstream corporations, media, and all of that.
Well, Dr. Sharif, that's a wonderful question. When I reflect back on my own personal life, I mean, there were a couple things. Back then in the 1960s, there were church organizations in the United States who would sponsor Cuban refugees' entry into the United States. That was the legal thing to do, and that's what was done. So from a church organization standpoint, The church that sponsored us, actually, we settled originally in Gary, Indiana. And so they were very welcoming. However, from a different perspective, as I was growing up at a young age and going, to preschool and kindergarten, et cetera, I did encounter a certain degree of ridicule and negativity, but primarily from young kids, right, who didn't know better, who would make fun of my family for having accents, because they just didn't know any better. It was completely rare and strange for them to be interacting with someone from another country who didn't speak the language. So I don't know. To me, I don't have the magic answer. I just kept my, as we say in the United States, I kept my eye on the ball, and I just kept moving forward, and I tried my best to not let these things affect me. And ultimately, when I could show other students and I could show the teachers, because I studied very hard, and academically things came fairly natural to me, so I was blessed. But when I could excel, then I would let my achievements basically show my way through. I wouldn't worry about that. They would have to worry about keeping up with me sometimes. So it's a difficult thing. I know a number of Cubans who have come over recently in the last decade. I just had a doctor visiting my practice, learning to do a surgery, who's been in practice 12 years now in the United States, and he came over from Cuba. And I think, gosh, how would it be as an adult if I had been my parents, if I were this doctor coming over as an adult? I think it's different when you're a child. I think you have an innate sense of resilience. Children bounce back from many things very easily. When you're an adult, it can be a lot more challenging. So I really, think highly of my parents. I could never imagine going to a country. If I had to go to, let's say, some country I don't speak the language, if I had to go to China and start a new life, if I had to go to Russia and start a new life at this stage of my life, wow, that would be challenging. That would be challenging. So but it was a thoughtful question, Dr. Sharif.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Husto, just really quickly, because you mentioned having been raised in Gary, Indiana, and a lot of times people forget that Gary, Indiana was very much of a civil rights kind of town, and there was a lot of things that were going on in the civil rights movement in the 60s in the Gary, and all along those lines. I'm assuming that the church might have been a Black church, and but that might be a assumption on my part that could be incorrect and everything like that. So I'm just wondering if you could talk about that to some degree, Dr. Husto, but also your thoughts, if you are able to share them, on the current state of immigration and everything like that. If you don't want to go there, I can understand that, but it is a hot button topic that we've talked a lot about here on this network and everything. But I just wanted your take on how we're handling the immigration situation.
Okay, well, great questions, Mark. So to answer your first question, the church that sponsored us went by the name of Central Christian Church. And I remember our address because we lived, they put us up in a little apartment next to the church, 716 Jefferson Street. I just went back last month because I delivered a commencement address at my former high school from 46 years ago that I graduated. And so I went back and drove into Gary because, unfortunately, Mark, as you may or may not know, Gary's not a very safe area in general. It wasn't back then, but it's even worse now. And so I convinced my wife, let's go ahead and take a drive in. And I was sad to see that the church, the building was there. It was converted into something else. And the little apartment next door had been torn down. It was just basically just an empty lot. But no, it wasn't a Black church. Although yes, Gary has a heavy Black population. But no, it wasn't necessarily Black. It was just mixed, combination of races. but very welcoming, very loving. I remember that specifically. I remember Michael Jackson and the Jackson 5 were just starting. Richard Hatcher was the mayor. He's the one who kind of gave them their jumping off point. In terms of your second question, Mark, I'll just make it brief because I don't want to get into a debate about politics, because I would never be able to be a politician because it's just too much animosity one way or the other. But being a refugee myself, I firmly believe in immigrants. I think immigrants are good. Immigrants make our country rich, diverse. For any country, I think any country needs a certain number of immigrants. However, I do believe in the rule of law, and I do think that immigrants need to come into the country the correct way, the legal way. And I just, for the life of me, I do not understand. I don't think I'll ever understand what happened under the Biden administration, where he just welcomed everyone to cross over illegally. That was pure 100% against the laws on the books in the United States. And when you just open the doors and you don't vet people, then you get a lot of illegals who are criminals, right? Just like when a number of years ago, Cuba let out, with the Mariel boat lift, and they let out people out of their prisons who came to the United States. That's not good. You don't want your country infiltrated by criminals. Now, in the grand scheme of things, it may be a small percentage of those so-called illegal immigrants that came over, but it doesn't matter. If you take 2% of a million people, that's a heck of a lot of people. So you still don't want them coming into your country. I think immigration needs to be vetted. It needs to follow the rule of law. But I'm all in favor of immigration.
So it's been long established that immigrants, whether legal or not, have a lower crime rate than native-born Americans. But I have a question for you about the feeling that everybody has now that things are moving so fast that if you slow down at all, you're going to fall behind. The amount of medical data is said to double every month. And you're an eye surgeon. Do you have trouble keeping up with all the new developments in your field?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rick. I guess for me at this stage of my career, it's not that difficult in the sense that I've really specialized. As my 36, I'm just finishing this month my 36th year of practice, and as my practice has evolved, I just do mainly two things now. I do cataract surgery and I do eyelid surgery. Those are the two things. So I can keep up on those two things fairly easily. If I were practicing general ophthalmology where I had to know everything, then it might be a little bit more challenging. But fortunately, medical organizations, like the American Academy of Ophthalmology, the American Society of Cataract and Refractive Surgery, they have great annual meetings, and there's meetings all over the place that you can go live, you can do virtual. So there are ways of keeping up with things. But now in my career, I'm so targeted that I do a lot of the same things. And then as they evolve, as those procedures evolve, I keep up with it. So it hasn't been an issue for me personally. But a good question overall.
These droopy things to be lifted up, I'd come to you?
That is correct. Yeah, I do a lot of what's called laser blepharoplasty. I started using the CO2 laser for eyelid surgery for blepharoplasty in 1995. I was one of the few, and still am, relatively speaking. And so I have a course where I teach a 3-day intensive workshop in our practice. And I have surgeons, for example, the surgeon I had mentioned earlier that came over from Cuba 12 years ago, he just came to our practice. He's actually based in Houston, but he came to our practice about 2 months ago to do that workshop. And so, I try and teach other doctors. Again, I'm still practicing full time, and God willing, if I continue to have good health, I will for another 10 years. But I'm at the stage of my life where I want to teach others. and I want them to learn from the pearls. I want to shorten their learning curve. I mean, everything I've learned, I've pretty much learned for the most part on my own. And I want to shorten the learning curve so that doctors out there can really do a fantastic job and have great results for their patients.
Hey,
Right, because a bad result means you walk around looking very surprised all the time.
Most of the time, hey, I'm not wearing my
Yeah,
glasses right now. I probably should be wearing them and everything like that. But what advice would you give to folks? Because I just came to my eye doctor not that long ago, because they're doing that annual check to make sure that cataracts and other things are not taking place, and that I'm not getting that whole need for having bifocals. And so far, I'm avoiding those. They may eventually come into need and all along those lines. But what advice would you give for folks such as my own eye doctor, and he's been in the practice for a number of years, Mr. Newman and everything, but the young people that want to get into the field of ophthalmology? So what advice would you give to folks that are thinking about that they want to be eye doctors?
Well, you used ophthalmology and then you used eye doctors in the same sentence, and we need to make a distinction, right? An ophthalmologist is a medical doctor who specializes in ophthalmology. An eye doctor can just be an optometrist, and they're two completely different paths. You know, optometrists just basically do routine exams. They sell glasses and contact lenses. Sometimes they have their own private practice. Sometimes they go to work for what we call big boxes, which are things like your Walmarts, Costco's, you know, those sorts of things. Ophthalmologists, you know, are true medical doctors. They can do surgery. I encourage doctors or wannabe doctors to pursue that career path. I think it's a fabulous path. I actually currently, I mentioned earlier that I have students that rotate with me quite frequently. And I know one of your guests earlier mentioned that he's in Barcelona. Actually, my student right now is a graduate from a medical school in Barcelona, and she wants to apply for an ophthalmology residency in the United States. So she's spending a month with me. Ophthalmology, even back when I first applied and even through today, is one of the most competitive residencies to get into in the United States. So it is difficult. You know, you got to do well in medical school. You got to have a great CV, resume. You probably nowadays have to do research. Back in my day, I didn't really have to do that, but I had other things in my favor. So it's very competitive. Let's put it that way. And that's just the way it is. That's just the way it is. But if you can do it and if you can get in, good for you, because I think you'll have an incredible life and you'll enjoy serving patients.
Sounds
So
good.
do you
Just to
see
be
people
clear,
with-
Dr. Mark Newman is an optometrist. So it was the optometrist that I went to see, and not the. But it is Dr. Mark Newman is my current eye doctor. I still like to use that phrase, and I know it's not the correct phrase and everything like that.
Do you see people with eye damage from information addiction where they just can't pull their eyes away from a screen for more than 10 seconds at a time? 18, 20 hours a day?
Yeah, I think we all see that. I don't think we have to be an ophthalmologist to see that. That's commonplace where people are just addicted to the screen, whether it be a computer screen, their phone screen, any screen. And that's part of what I mentioned earlier about taking a non-stimulus break throughout the day and just detaching from all of that, because boy, it is and I'm guilty of it as well. I mean, I love my phone. I love my computer. I'm checking it, right? That's part of the instant gratification that we've all come to obtain and learn and look forward to. That's just part of our life. I don't think it's going to go away, certainly.
John down there in Canada has a question for you. Or up there in Canada, I should say, from my point of view, has a question for you.
Yeah, I have a question for our doctor, our guest. So concerning the marshmallow test, from my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, there have been later and larger studies after the Stanford marshmallow test where the link is much weaker than initially determined. So I just want to know if you're aware of those later studies and whether that
Yes,
makes any difference in your perspective on this.
Yes, no, I am well aware of those, and it's hard to say. It's even like in medicine that there are studies that show certain things, and then you're going to have contrary studies that don't show the correlation to be as statistically significant. So I understand, and your point is well taken, but I just still feel. I mean, the Stanford marshmallow experiment has just always, in a sense, let's say, stood the test of time, and it's something that's referred to over and over. And intuitively, right or wrong, I mean, intuitively, it just makes sense to me. So I guess I'd have to leave it there.
Yeah, I'd caution, and that's the point. The whole point of doing, later studies and larger studies. We have to look at data rather than relying on gut feeling. But I understand your perspective. I just wanted to caution you on thinking that the Stanford experiment is any way as good as you might think.
Oh yeah, no, I totally get you. I'm 100% behind what you're saying. I can't disagree with anything you're saying, but worth the discussion.
Definitely.
A lot of those big studies of the 1960s, behavioral studies, may have been contaminated by people who were onto the game. There was a famous TV show in the 60s called Candid Camera where they played pranks on people. And in some of these studies, people may have figured out what they were going for, like the one where people were asked to give electric shocks to people. And I think so. In those cases, people, or the prisoner study where they made some people jail wardens and other people prisoners, and everybody behaved badly, and people may have just been going along with the game.
Yeah, could have been some of that case and everything like that. Hey, Sasha, I know in about another 5 or 10 minutes we'll be doing the Ukraine, Russia, China show. So I don't know if you've got any questions for the good doctor or anything, but we will be having that show coming up at 11 o'clock and all along those lines. And I know you'll be following the goings on in that part of the world. I kind of alluded to some of them in the early newscasts and everything like that, but I didn't know if you had any questions. Everybody else has asked one, but you haven't jumped in, so I'm giving you the opportunity.
Thank you. I'm from Ukraine, which is now being attacked by Russia, and there are incredible atrocities are being happened. And what it proves that country that has nuclear weapons can absolutely, without any repercussions, to attack country which happened not to have nuclear arms. So therefore, all the international treaties, all the United Nations efforts, so-called, it's really not working. Today is a lawless international order. There is no order at all. And it's a right of a power nation to do anything what it wants with a smaller nation, and nobody can do anything about it. I'm glad that Cuba escaped this fate, and hopefully will be able to develop a just society. It may not happen so soon, although maybe I'm wrong. What's your opinion?
So I missed my internet kind of cut out a little bit towards the latter part, so I missed some of what you were saying. But
he was making the parallels between Ukraine and Cuba, so I just wanted. I think he was asking you your thoughts on Cuba as it is now, because Cuba did escape after the communists took over. A lot of you folks did escape Cuba, which was the old Cuba and everything like that. So I think that. And I don't want to speak for Sasha, but he's wishing that Cuba maybe can get back to its old ways and everything like that. And I'm thinking you probably have similar thoughts, but I don't want to speak for you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see an end in sight for Cuba, unfortunately. I would love for it to become democratic. The people there are so incredible, and it's amazing. Even under communist dictatorship, they are such happy, friendly people, as Ukrainians are. The Ukrainians, to what little knowledge I have, I see them going through this incredible war, and yet they still, to a certain degree, have a smile on their face, and they still have a certain level of optimism. And the Cuban people, they're just loving people. They're happy people. They're music-oriented people. You have music playing everywhere. But I just don't see an end in sight, because the communist dictatorship has such a stronghold that there's no way to have an uprising. The only way to overthrow Cuba would be to have a military coup. You would have to somehow convince the military to back the citizens rather than the government, and I don't see that happening any day soon. So there are certain parallels. I don't know that much about Ukraine, although I did have a doctor that worked for me about 15 years ago who was an ophthalmologist who was Ukrainian. But I think every culture has its similarities and differences, but its similarities. And when you're being dominated by communism or socialism, whether it be Russia attacking Ukraine or whether it be Cuba being held tight by a communist dictatorship, it's sad. I mean, it's sad to me, but that's what makes the world go round. We all have different things that go on in the world.
No doubt about that and everything. Just tell us really quickly the title of your book and where folks can get it. And then I know you got to get to your next appointment and everything like that. And of course, we've got to get to our next show. We did the Ukraine, Russia, China show and everything like that. So, Dr. Housto and everything, if you could please tell folks how you can be reached and contacted. And like I said, you've been a great guest, and hopefully we can have more conversations with you in the not too distant future. But I definitely think a lot of folks have learned a lot on this particular episode.
Well, thank you, Mark. Yes. Basically, my book is The Power of Pause, Mastering Delayed Gratification for Success. It's widely available. Obviously, the most easy way to get it is through Amazon. I also narrated it myself, so it is on Audible as well, with me narrating it. You can get it at other major retailers as well. And to contact me, you can either go to my personal website, which is DrEmilioHousto.com, and that's DrEmilioJusto.com, or you can email me directly at Dr. Housto, DrJusto, at DrEmilioHousto.com. And I'll get that email, and I'm very good at responding to emails, so I check them all the time. It's part of my instant gratification.
Understood. Well, you've been a great guest. We're going to get ready to get on out of here and everything like that. But I've thoroughly enjoyed having you along with our regulars and all along those lines. And hopefully we'll get you back in the near future. But thanks for being a great guest.
Thank you very much, Mark. And thank you for the entire team there. Appreciate the opportunity.
No problem.